The MG3 is Australia's most popular light hatchback, and now MG are replacing the old one with this completely new version of the MG3. Now, if you know anything about the MG3, you know that it's a car for people who don't really care about cars because it's not really that good. But this car has nothing to do with the previous generation apart from being called the MG3. MG sold 15,430 MG3s last year, but this new model is going to be replacing that car. And judging by the way MG have updated this thing, they are very serious about keeping that #1 spot. Now, I'm one of the lucky few that gets to drive this car before you're able to buy it, so there's actually no pricing available at the moment, but I'm hoping that this whole range will be under $30,000, and the entry-level pure petrol MG3 is similar in price to the outgoing model. Now, there are two engine options like I mentioned. You can get a pure petrol engine, which is a 1.5 litre naturally aspirated petrol 4-cylinder, and that's going to make 81 kilowatts and 142 newton meters of torque. So you're not going to win any drag races with that motor, but it is going to be the cheapest engine option. You can then option this hybrid motor, which is again a 1.5 litre 4-cylinder petrol motor, but it's not the same as the pure petrol. It makes less power, but it's paired up to a 1.83 kilowatt hour battery. Now, the good news is that these cars are front wheel drive, so they're going to be pretty simple to operate and service, but the other good news is that they get rid of that nasty 4-speed transmission. So the base model gets a CVT transmission, just like most economy cars, but this gets a hybrid automatic transmission according to the spec sheet that MG supplied me, meaning that it does have some capability for regenerative braking, meaning you can lift off the accelerator and it'll feed energy back into that motor. Now, on productreview.com.au, where you can review your own car and also read reviews of owners who bought and owned cars like the MG3, you'll be able to see that the MG3, the previous generation, gets a score of 2.8 out of 5, which isn't brilliant. Some people complained about just the fact it wasn't a great car and they just didn't really enjoy the driving experience, which is fine to say because it wasn't a very well-built car compared to this. The people who liked the car said they liked the fact it was cheap to own and run and actually very easy to drive, which this car just improves upon. And I had a look around the internet looking at MG3 reliability, and it seems the overwhelming reaction is that it's a boring car, but it's actually pretty easy to keep running and keep its service for a reasonable price. So hopefully that sort of reliability carries over into this new model, which is drastically improved. The new MG3 is completely redesigned from the ground up, meaning that it actually looks like MG cared about the design of this car compared to the previous generation. It's got a new grille up front, and we have this carbon fiber looking plastic, which is meant to look like a more aggressive splitter. We get 16-inch wheels down the side here, so they're small and very efficient, but now they've got 5 studs instead of 4 like the old one. We've also got LED daytime running lights, but this car, because it's the entry-level version of the hybrid, gets halogen headlamps. And it looks like the tire you're going to get on this car is a come-ho tire, which is pretty standard if this car is going to cost under 30 grand. This base hybrid model is getting manual folding mirrors, but you do have power adjustment there. There is no keyless locking and entry, but there is push button start. And something else I love is this thin A-pillar, which gives you really good visibility out when you're driving this thing. And look, no more drum brakes at the back, instead of getting 4 disc brakes all around, which is a very good thing. So if you're buying a hybrid MG3, you probably care about fuel usage. So the pure petrol MG3 uses 6 litres per 100 kilometers on the combined loop, where this thing should only use 4.3 litres. So in general usage, it should use less. When you're in the dense urban environment in the city, for example, the petrol should only use 7.8 litres, so it goes up. With this, is apparently claimed to use just 0.9 litres when you're driving in slow-moving city traffic or just around the suburbs. But here's the thing, if you take the petrol out on the highway, it will just consume 4.9 litres. But if you take this on the highway, it will apparently consume more than the pure petrol model at 6.3 litres per 100 kilometers. So if you're doing lots of highway driving, you're better off driving the pure petrol MG3. But if you want to save money and you're driving in the suburbs and in the city, you're better off buying the MG3 Hybrid. But the other catch is that the base petrol model will use any sort of fuel above 91, which is pretty normal for a car that should be under $30,000, where this hybrid model requires premium fuel, which is 95 RON and above. So it's going to be more expensive to fill up the MG3 Hybrid, even though it should be saving you some fuel. But I will say, something that's really impressed me is the build quality of this car. Sure, it has some plastic fenders up front for pedestrians' crash safety standards, but things like the weight of the door is actually quite impressive, and people jumping into this car will be impressed with just the actual feel of the door handle, the doors, and just how even all the shut lines are, which is a really big improvement compared to the previous MG3. But it even gets LED tail lights, which actually look really good. But the other thing is that it will have halogen effect lights for the indicator and the brake lights. But just back here, it looks like MG have taken a lot of care in designing this thing, and it makes you actually consider wanting to own one rather than having to own one because it's one of the cheapest cars out there. Additionally, the MG3s come with a 7-year unlimited kilometer warranty, which MG is proud to announce with a sticker here on the back window. And you can let everyone know that you bought the hybrid MG3 because it's called the Hybrid Plus, which is a badge underneath the MG3 logo. Of course, we have a manual tailgate and 293 liters of boot space back here, which is fairly reasonable for a car in the light hatchback category. There is more storage underneath the boot floor here, but there is no spare tire because that's where our battery is located on this hybrid model. I haven't got my hands on a petrol model to confirm it does have a spare tire underneath there, but I could assume if you take out that space for the hybrid motor up front, the battery has to go to the back. I'm assuming that the petrol model would have a spare. And the slightly annoying thing is that your seats fold down as a one bench seat at the back. So if you do want to make the most of the boot space back here, you can't have any passengers if you want to fold the seats down in the back. But I appreciate this car also comes with a cargo cover. This car comes with cloth seats, but it does have some nice orange contrast stitching. We also get some air vents in here in the back, which are nice. There's 2 of them, so you don't have to fight over the airflow. And you've also got a single USB Type-A port here in the back. And there's also a Velcro little piece here that hides the ISOFIX points, so it looks nice and clean when you hide those away. Now the seats are pretty comfortable, but this middle seat, oof, it's gonna be very tight if you have to put anyone here. And also it's weird that these fabric seats don't come with any mat pockets, but the upgraded leather type material seats do. And the windows in the back go down all the way, which is a very nice touch, so you don't feel super claustrophobic in the back. MG knows that all that effort that went into the MG4's interior is what made it quite nice to live with, because it had a minimalist type interior, but it had really decent touch points for the price. And that's been translated into the new MG3. We're getting the same steering wheel that you'd find on the MG4 electric car, and that's a good thing. Even though this is a polyurethane wheel, which is fine, it feels okay in the hand, and it's what I would expect at something that should be more affordable. But here's the thing, it feels really nice and it looks great too. This 2-spoke design feels very futuristic, and I actually really enjoy engaging with it. And it's got great functionality and lots of physical buttons. But the annoying thing is, it's not telescopically adjustable. Like, come on, you built a car from the ground up and you couldn't do that. But it's tilt adjustable, so that's pretty standard, but no telescopic adjustment is a bit of a letdown. But truthfully, I haven't felt my need to adjust it because there is enough adjustment in these seats that I feel like I have a decent driving position. So they get away with it this time, but if you're going to be a taller driver, you might find it a bit annoying to not have telescopic adjustment. Perhaps the biggest change is this 10.25-inch touchscreen up here, which has wired Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, but it has a new user interface and it's really easy to use, it's really snappy, and it feels a lot better than what you would expect at this price point. Something like the Kia Picanto has a rubbish screen, where this feels like it's leagues ahead. So that's a major plus point. And Apple CarPlay works seamlessly on it, but the annoying thing is that all your climate controls are locked in this screen. So if you want to change things like temperature or anything like that, you have to press this climate control button to jump into it. But something I found quite annoying is that this button does not work when you're in Apple CarPlay. So you have to hit the home button first, and then you have to hit your climate controls, which is again an annoying way to use your climate controls when you throw everything into the screen. But we have physical buttons for our front and rear demisters, and we also again have that home button, which is very useful, and we have physical buttons for your volume controls. Now I like this pattern here on the dashboard, and I especially like the dashboard design because it looks a little bit more interesting than a basic interior. There's lots of scratchy plastics in here, but again, it's what I would expect. But here's the thing, the visibility out is fantastic. Now you also get gloss black plastic around the top of the dashboard here, which is fine, but when you're touching it on the steering wheel and around the gear selector, it shows a lot of fingerprints, which is very annoying. Now ripped out of the MG4 is this 7-inch display, which is fantastic. It makes this thing feel so much more advanced because it shows a lot of car data there, which is really easy to engage with through these physical buttons on the steering wheel. And the thing I love is that this new safety suite on the MG3 is standard throughout all cars. So we're getting a bunch of new safety tech like blind spot monitoring. We're also getting autonomous emergency braking, rear cross traffic alert, and we're also getting adaptive cruise and active lane keep assist. All very good things to have on an affordable car. And additionally, this car is using its sensors to show you other cars on the road that are around you. So if you're not going to look over your blind spot, your car should display if there's a car in your blind spot using this little left side of the screen, which is very impressive. Now, there's a little storage area down here. You have one additional USB-A port to connect your Apple CarPlay and Android Auto through a wire, and you have a USB Type-C port just for charging and a 12-volt socket. You get some cup holders up front. You get this rotary shift dial here on these hybrid models, and we also get a little bit of storage, which has a little sliding cover here, and you also get a nicer sort of feeling armrest, which feels a bit more premium. And these front seats are very comfortable, except for the fact they have a little bit of a lumbar support down near the butt, and so where your tailbone meets the back part of the chair, it feels like there's a lump pressing against that, which isn't very comfortable. So MG needs to address this stiff part of the seat because it's just not that comfortable, and it sort of ruins an already very nice and supportive seat. And you have okay storage in the glove box, and the door bins are okay, but they're a bit thin, so they won't really hold any big water bottles like this. But it does feel like a lot of thought has gone into this interior, and it also is really simple and easy to use, and it makes daily driving this thing very pleasurable. Another thing is that this hybrid model gets drive modes, which do make somewhat of a difference. Now, we have 3 drive modes. We have Eco, Normal, and Sport. And I can tell you what, right now, if you're expecting Sport to turn this into a bit of a hot hatch, it's not. So what we're expecting with Eco is that it's going to help us save a bit of fuel. What it also does is transform the steering into the most dead steering I've ever felt in my life. It's very light, and it's going to be great for people who want super light steering. So it's going to be good for the city, and also should focus on trying to save you a bit of fuel. Now, you have Normal, which is what I drive around most of the time, and you also have Sport. And jumping into Sport, everything sort of wakens up. You feel the throttle map just sort of increase, and you sort of go a little bit faster up if you are maintaining speed. And you also got a bit more of a heavier steering feel, but again, this isn't much of a hot hatch in that way. My expectations were pretty low for this car. I thought, hey, this isn't going to be the most exciting drive. It's going to be an A to B car, and it's going to be something pretty basic. Boy, was I mostly right, but also kind of wrong. This thing is really impressive in terms of its ride. It's easy to drive, and also just the driving experience in general is very pleasant. I love the steering wheel here. It's got a great feel to it in terms of the actual grips, and it just feels nice to hold in the hand at 9 and 3, and this is all you want to hold. So it's got a great design, which is a very important thing because you'll be touching this thing all the time. Now, cornering is interesting because this thing, it moves around relatively flat through a corner. It's obviously going to start giving because it has quite soft suspension, and that's great for back road driving because you're going to go over potholes and speed bumps with little to no issues. Those really small wheels, yes, I know people want bigger wheels, but having that much sidewall and all on the tire, like a bunch of fat around the tire, and also having a nice spongy suspension setup is a good thing. So you're going to feel like you're driving around on a bit of a pillowy ride, which is what you want in something like the MG3. Now, acceleration up a hill like this, we'll put our foot down and... what the heck? We didn't go anywhere. What? I'm putting my foot flat to the floor right now, and it wasn't going anywhere. That's weird. So the engine doesn't feel like it's connected to my throttle. Instead, it feels like it's prioritizing the electric powertrain. And as I go up this hill here, it's very slow. And this is in Sport too. Wow. Okay, we're gonna try that one more time. It's got a bit of an incline here. So 40 to 60 in 3, 2, 1. Wow. So look, the uphill performance in this car is not brilliant. You put your foot down and it's going to take a long while to respond. It's sort of just like calling into the void. You go, hey, I want to accelerate, and this car doesn't give you anything back. And then eventually you hear the echo of your voice, which is when the car will get up to a reasonable speed. That's not great. But then the weird thing is, driving around town and driving at low speeds and gradually getting up to the speed limit, this thing builds speed pretty reasonably. It just doesn't like rapidly accelerating when you put your foot down. Except now at 70 k's an hour, we've got a bit of electric boost here. We can go from 70 to 80. Yeah, it's not the fastest thing. Now in terms of the brakes, let's go for a little brake in 3, 2, 1, and yeah, they're pretty good. They're a bit spongy, but they're really easy to modulate, and driving this thing smooth around town is really easy to do. I'm going to jump back into normal mode now out of Sport, and my fuel economy has been really good. I've been looking around 5.6 litres per 100 Ks, averaged over 85 kilometres of driving, or about 4 hours and 23 minutes of driving, because we live in Sydney and we can't move that far because of traffic. This thing's really nice and pleasurable to drive around. It drives a lot like an electric car, and the electric motors will want to work even at highway speeds. And then once it needs the motor to kick in, which is often because it's not a big battery on board, it's only 1.83 kilowatt hours. Now the initial startup of the petrol motor is a little bit coarse, so I was a bit scared thinking I'd accidentally scrape the wheels against the gutter, but it was actually just the petrol motor waking up, and you can hear it occasionally, but then it's actually pretty quiet here in the hybrid mode, which is a cool thing. So it's not a completely noisy, constantly working petrol motor in conjunction with this electric motor. Now the speakers in here, pretty decent. The 6 speaker system's all right. So that's actually one of the more impressive things, is that a bass speaker system doesn't sound too bad. Now I also like the regenerative braking here, because you can just lift off and the car will start braking for you, which will then feed energy back into the battery, which is awesome. So that is a major plus point for the MG3 Hybrid, because instead of just wasting that energy, at least feeds back into the electric motor, and you can drive on electric power more often than a car that doesn't have active regenerative braking. The turning circle is also brilliant in this thing, so it's really easy to maneuver in tight streets too. And also the indicated driving range was around 600 to 700 kilometers according to the car's trip computer, so that's really good for a small little hatchback. But what's weird about the acceleration is that when you're on a flat bit of road, for example, you can sort of put your foot down, it rapidly responds thanks to that electric motor and battery. So at lower speeds it's got good pickup, but when you're going up a hill, it doesn't seem to want to move at all. So if enough of you watch this and actually want to know what this thing's like to take on a highway drive, one of the weird things is that out on the highway, I actually found it okay, but I need to take it on a more extended road trip to be able to justify that. So if enough people watch this video, I'll make sure to take this on a bit of a road trip to really test how this powertrain performs at higher speeds. Traveling between 100 and 110 kilometers an hour, I found this thing to be fine. But I will say, if you're looking to upgrade out of your old MG3, this will feel like a massive improvement over that. So yes, the uphill performance of this car leaves a lot to be desired when it comes to actually putting down 144 kilowatts. It seems that it's just almost using the smallest amount of power possible to go up a very steep hill. Now we have another hill here to verify if it's just steep hills or is it just any incline in general. I'm gonna go from 40 to 60 km an hour in 3, 2, 1. That seems far more responsive. So it just seems that steep hills really put off the performance of this car. But let's talk about the rest of the car. Around town, this thing is actually pretty good. It's really responsive. So if I want to just put my foot down and move up a bit more, this thing does react. And that electric motor and that petrol motor work together quite well. And I'm also getting decent fuel economy figures, around mid 5 litres per 100 kilometer figures. I'm getting 5.6 litres right now. That's pretty good. So you are saving a bit of fuel, even if it does require premium fuel. The annoying thing is that this does have the European speed beep, the same thing that really annoys me about Hyundai and Kia's new cars. You can turn it off relatively easily, a little bit easier than Hyundai and Kia's cars, but again, I will say this to every manufacturer that brings this out to Australia, I'm not sure why we have to bring it to Australia when it's not mandated by law. It's just simply car manufacturers bringing out European spec cars with that safety system engaged. And until that's into law, I think it's a very wasteful and redundant system, and something that doesn't have to be on these cars. It's just very annoying that every time you jump in, you want to turn off that speed beep warning, because it's just annoying, especially when it doesn't read speed signs very accurately, which is super annoying, especially if you're driving out of a car park or past the school zone. This thing will think you're speeding even though you're not. But I have to say, we're riding next to a truck right now, and this is doing a great job of just keeping a lot of that sound out. Now, I'm not a big fan of the halogen headlights. They're not the best, they're not the brightest, and driving around at night, they weren't just what I wanted. I think the LED lights will be well worth the upgrade in the Essence model, but this Excite model just makes do with those basic halogen lights, which is a bit of a downer. But compared to the MG4, we actually have symbols for the radar cruise control, where before it was just a bunch of arrows, so you sort of had to guess what they did. So at least that works very well. And these physical buttons are super easy to use, super easy to engage with, and the screen is also very responsive too. So I have to say, major plus points for the way you engage with this car. Although I have to say, I have the screen brightness full on this car here, and I can feel the screen actually getting hot to the touch. It's not unbearable by any means, but yeah, this screen is getting pretty hot. But that heat's actually not affecting the performance of the screen. But I have to say, this radar cruise control works pretty well. So yeah, it's very easy to use and live with.